The outpost on the edge of human space was a peaceful place, a small colony where humans and aliens had learned to coexist. The sun was setting on the horizon, casting a warm orange light across the barren land. Mark, a young soldier, stood watch. He had been stationed here for months, guarding the outpost and protecting the diplomat, Lyra, who had come to negotiate peace with the nearby alien factions. The air was still, the only sound coming from the occasional crackle of the communication system. Mark had always thought that peace was something to be cherished, but he also knew that it was fragile. As much as he wanted to believe that they were safe, he could never shake the feeling that danger was always lurking just beyond the stars. He had been trained for this, but he never imagined that the real test would come so suddenly. Lyra, a young alien with striking silver eyes and long, flowing black hair, stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She was nervous. Mark could tell she had only recently become part of the peace talks, and her role was crucial. If she failed, the consequences would be far-reaching. "Do you think we'll succeed?" Lyra asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. Mark turned his head to glance at her, offering a reassuring smile. "I believe in you. You have what it takes." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lyra had always been kind, but she carried the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. Mark couldn't imagine how much pressure she was under. Just as he was about to say something else, the quiet night was shattered by a loud, shrill alarm. Mark's instincts kicked in immediately. His hand reached for his weapon as he turned to face the sky. A swarm of enemy ships appeared on the horizon, their dark shapes moving quickly toward the outpost. "Get down," Mark shouted, pushing Lyra to the ground as a blast of energy slammed into the outer wall. The enemy ships were closing in fast. This was not a warning strike. It was an attack. A full-scale assault. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the nearest shelter. They had to get inside, away from the open space. The enemy ships were too powerful, and there was no time to fight them head-on. "Stay close." Mark barked as he sprinted toward the entrance of the outpost's main building. The heavy doors slid shut behind them with a hiss, and Mark quickly locked them. He turned to Lyra, his face grim. "We need to find cover. They're after you," Mark said, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. The negotiations, they must have known. Lyra nodded, her face pale. She was trying to keep calm, but Mark could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't used to being in danger, and he could tell that this situation was unlike anything she had ever faced. As the ground trembled beneath their feet from the blasts outside, Mark led Lyra through the narrow corridors of the outpost. Checked the perimeter cameras, and the view was a nightmare. Enemy soldiers were pouring into the base, overwhelming the guards stationed here. "We won't last long in here," Mark said, his mind racing. He needed a plan. He needed to get Lyra to safety. If they could get to the escape pods, they might stand a chance. But he had no idea if they could make it through the main hall without being seen. Suddenly, the walls shook again, and the lights flickered. A loud crash echoed through the building as the outer door was blasted open. Mark instinctively pushed Lyra behind him, drawing his weapon as the first wave of attackers entered the hall. They were fast, too fast. Mark fired several shots, but the attackers moved with precision, dodging his aim and returning fire. His heart raced as the sound of laser fire filled the air. "Get back," Mark yelled to Lyra as he moved forward to take cover. His pulse was hammering in his ears, and he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had to protect Lyra. That was his only job. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't used to this kind of violence. Her people were peaceful, and she had never been in a battle before. Mark didn't have time to explain. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her along, ducking behind a stack of crates. They had to keep moving. "Stay low," Mark ordered, his voice harsh with urgency. "We're going to the escape pods. No matter what happens, you stay behind me." Lyra nodded, but Mark could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wanted to do something to help. But she was not a soldier. She had no training in combat. As they moved through the outpost's darkened corridors, Mark's mind raced. He could hear the sound of footsteps approaching enemy soldiers. He had to think fast. They reached the main chamber where the escape pods were located. Mark saw that the door was still intact, but the soldiers were closing in on them. Had to act fast. Lyra, Mark said, his voice calm but filled with determination. You have to go. Get to the pod. I'll cover you. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. No, Mark, I won't leave you. Mark grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. You have to. It's the only way you'll survive. I'll hold them off, but you need to go. Before she could protest, a group of soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor. Mark pushed Lyra toward the escape pod, shoving her inside. As she turned to argue, Mark raised his weapon and fired, hitting one of the soldiers in the chest. They were closing in, and he had no time left. Go, Mark shouted, his voice strained. Now. Lyra hesitated for just a moment before she closed the pod's door. She could still see Mark outside, his figure silhouetted against the chaos. Her heart ached, but she knew he was right. The escape pod shot into the sky, and Lyra watched through. The small window as the outpost grew smaller and smaller. The last thing she saw before the pod entered hyperspace was Mark. Standing tall, his weapon raised as he faced the enemies that were coming for them both. Lyra sat alone in the escape pod, her hands trembling as she gripped the controls. Her heart was still racing from the chaos she had just escaped, but now it was her mind that was clouded with worry. She couldn't stop thinking about Mark. He had saved her life, but she had left him behind. She had done what he asked. But the guilt weighed heavily on her. The soft hum of the escape pod's engines was the only sound that filled the small space. Lyra stared out of the window, watching the stars streak by as the pod drifted further away from the outpost. It felt like hours had passed, though she knew it had only been minutes. She couldn't shake the image of Mark, standing in the hallway, fighting off the attackers. She had seen the pain in his eyes when he pushed her into the pod, but she hadn't been able to stay. She was still alive, but he was back there facing the enemy alone. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, and she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't afford to fall apart. She had a mission, a job to finish. But Mark's sacrifice kept playing in her mind. She had to go back for him. She didn't know how, but she couldn't leave him behind, as the pod continued its journey. Through space, Lyra's thoughts turned to what had happened during the attack. The enemy forces had been relentless. They had come from nowhere, striking without warning. She had never seen such violence before, and she had never imagined that her peaceful mission would end this way. She had always thought she could reason with the alien factions, bring them together, and end the conflict without bloodshed. But now everything had changed. The pod finally began to slow as it approached a nearby planet. Lyra took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. The planet was a safe haven, a place where she could regroup and figure out her next move. She had no idea what had happened to Mark, but she couldn't abandon him. She needed to know if he was alive. The pod's landing gears touched the surface of the planet with a soft thud. Lyra stood, her legs feeling weak beneath her as she moved toward the hatch. She opened it slowly, taking in the unfamiliar landscape. The planet was quiet, its barren terrain stretching out before her in all directions. There was no sign of life, no welcoming committee. It felt empty, like the world had been abandoned long ago. Lyra stepped out of the pod, her boots crunching on the rocky ground. She activated her communicator, hoping for a signal, but the screen remained blank. She cursed under her breath. The attack had destroyed everything, even the communications system. She had no way of knowing if anyone else had survived. She was on her own. She took a deep breath and forced herself to focus. There was no time for panic. She had to keep moving. Her mission was still alive. She had to survive, but she also had to save Mark. That was her priority now, for the next few hours. Lyra wandered across the planet's surface, searching for any sign of civilization. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. She knew she couldn't stay here forever. She needed to find a way back to the outpost to find Mark, but she didn't know where to start. Every direction seemed the same, and the more she walked, the more hopeless the situation felt. Suddenly, the faintest sound reached her ears, a low hum, almost like a whisper in the wind. Lyra froze, her instincts alert. She turned in the direction of the sound, her heart racing. It was faint, but it was something. A signal, perhaps. Her mind raced as she tried to process the possibility. She didn't have much time, and if there was a way to communicate with anyone, she had to find it. She followed the sound, her steps quickening as the noise grew louder. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a small valley. In the center of the valley, she saw a structure, a building that seemed out of place on such a desolate planet. It was old, but it looked intact. Lyra approached cautiously, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The building was made of stone, its walls weathered but strong. There were no signs of life, no movement. Lyra hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dark interior. Her heart pounded in her chest as she entered, her hand resting on the weapon at her side. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The walls were covered in ancient markings, some of which Lyra couldn't understand. But there was something about this place that felt important, as though it had been waiting for her. She moved through the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the far end of the room, she found a small console. It was old, its screens cracked, but it was still functional. Lyra rushed over to it, her fingers trembling as she activated the system. The console flickered to life, and a faint light illuminated the room. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as the screen came to life. There was a message, a transmission. It was faint, distorted, but Lyra could make out a voice. Lyra, the voice crackled, "We know you're out there. We've been waiting for you. Come to us." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was the voice of a trusted ally, someone from her people's council. They were alive. They had to be. The message ended abruptly, but Lyra knew what she had to do. She couldn't waste any more time. She had to find them, and she had to bring them back to the outpost. There was still hope. Mark was still alive. She had to believe that. She left the building. The path ahead unclear, but the message had given her a new sense of purpose. Lyra had a mission once again. She would not rest until she found Mark and brought him home. Had taken the arrows meant for her. Now it was her turn to return the favor. Lyra moved through the rocky landscape, her thoughts racing as she processed everything that had happened. The image of Mark, standing alone against the enemy, refusing to let her face the danger alone, was burned into her mind. She knew that she couldn't rest until she found a way to help him. She couldn't let him face the enemy alone, even if it meant risking everything. As she walked, she thought about the message she had received. Her heart had leaped when she recognized the voice on the transmission. It had been one of her people, an ally who had helped her in the past. If they were still alive, it meant that there was still hope, that she could still fight. But it also meant that time was running out. She had to act quickly. Hours passed as Lyra moved through the barren terrain, the sun setting slowly in the distance. She had made her way to the edge of a large canyon, the edges of which dropped off sharply into the unknown below. The silence around her was deafening, and for a moment, she stopped to catch her breath. But then she noticed something. In the distance, she saw a light. It was faint, but it was there, an eerie glow emanating from a deep cave in the side of the canyon. Lyra knew that this had to be the place. It was where she had to go. Without hesitation, she made her way toward the glow, stepping carefully over the rocky ground. Her heart beat faster with every step. She didn't know what she would find, but she had no choice but to keep going. As she entered the cave, the light grew stronger, revealing the deep, smooth walls carved into the stone. The air was cool inside, and the faint hum of energy filled the space. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of technology was powering the cave. It seemed ancient, yet advanced at the same time. Lyra moved deeper into the cave, her footsteps echoing as she walked. She had no idea what to expect, but she had a feeling that she was getting closer to something important. Finally, she reached the center of the cave. In the center of the room was a large pedestal, and on it rested an object wrapped in glowing energy. Lyra approached cautiously, her fingers reaching out toward it. The moment she touched the object, the energy around it pulsed, and a strange hum filled the room. Lyra stepped back, her heart racing as she felt a sudden surge of power. The object before her seemed to resonate with her, as if it were calling to her. She had heard of such artifacts and enchant relics from her people's history, it was said, that they were once used to heal, to enhance the abilities of those who wielded them. But it was also said that only those who were worthy could use them. Lyra wasn't sure if she was worthy, but she had no choice. If there was any hope of saving Mark, she had to try. She picked up the artifact, feeling the warmth of its power seep into her fingertips. It was shaped like a small orb, smooth and cool to the touch. The energy around it thrummed as if it were alive, responding to her presence. Lyra could feel it in her very bones. The moment the artifact made contact with her skin, something changed. A wave of energy washed over her, flooding her senses with visions and visions of battles fought long ago, of her people's struggles, and of the power that flowed through her now. It was overwhelming, but Lyra knew she had to focus. She had to use this power not for herself, but for Mark. Her mind raced as she tried to comprehend what was happening. She had heard stories of such artifacts, but she had never believed them to be true. The power that now surged through her was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was as if the very fabric of the universe had opened up to her, and she could see the connections between everything past, present, and future. With a deep breath, Lyra focused on the task at hand. She had to save Mark, and this artifact was the key. She didn't know how it would work, but she knew it was her only chance. The energy from the artifact surged once more, and Lyra felt herself being lifted off the ground. She gasped, the force of the energy pushing her to the brink of exhaustion. But she held on, focusing on Mark, imagining him in her mind, his face, his smile, his sacrifice. She could feel his presence, even though they were worlds apart. The power of the artifact seemed to respond to her will, pulsing with a life of its own. Suddenly, the world around her went dark. Lyra stumbled, disoriented as the energy around her faded. She felt weak, as if the very life had been drained from her, but then as the darkness lifted, she realized something had changed. The power of the artifact had fused with her, and now something was different. She could feel the strength within her, a strength that was not her own. She couldn't stay there much longer. Mark was still out there, and she had to find him. With the artifact now bonded to her, she felt more powerful than ever. She could sense everything around her, every vibration, every movement. It was as if the entire planet was connected too. Her Lyra turned to leave the cave, determined to find Mark and bring him back. She had the power to heal him now, to give him the strength he needed. It wasn't just her strength anymore, it was theirs. Together, she stepped out of the cave and into the cold night air, her mind already focused on the task ahead. Mark had taken the arrows meant for her. Now it was her turn to return the favor. Lyra had never felt so alive, yet so terrified in her entire life. The power from the artifact had bonded with her in ways she couldn't fully understand. But the new abilities it gave her were undeniable. She could feel the energy flowing within her, connecting her to everything around her. It was as if the entire planet, its very essence, was now part of her. She had learned something important from the artifact, something that gave her hope. The feeling of Mark's presence was still strong within her, even though they were separated by vast distances. She knew he was still alive, and that knowledge gave her the strength to continue. He had taken the arrows meant for her, and now it was her turn to save him. She couldn't waste any more time. Mark was out there, injured. She had to find him before it was too late. As she made her way across the barren landscape, the stars above her felt like they were watching, waiting. The planet, while silent, seemed to pulse with the same energy she now carried within her. The force inside her was both comforting and unsettling, and she struggled to control it. But there was no time to focus on herself now. Mark needed her. Lyra's thoughts shifted to the enemy. She had no idea who they were, but their attack had been swift and brutal. They had come for her, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. She had been so focused on surviving that she hadn't thought about what the attack meant for the peace negotiations.
What did this all lead to?
Were they willing to risk everything just to stop her mission? She didn't know, but she knew. One thing for sure, they wouldn't stop until she was gone. And they wouldn't stop until Mark was either dead or captured. Her steps quickened as she approached a series of cliffs, their jagged edges like teeth in the night. The lights of the enemy ships flickered in the distance, their shadows looming over the horizon. Lyra's heart sank as she realized that the threat was much closer than she had hoped. The enemy ships had followed her. They had tracked her to this planet, and they had no intention of letting her escape. She had to be quick. If they captured her, the mission would be over. Mark would be left to face the consequences alone. Lyra stopped at the edge of the cliff, her senses heightened. As she scanned the horizon, the enemy forces were preparing to land. She could feel their movements, their intentions, and she could see them in her mind's eye. She had to act fast. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the corner of her vision, and she spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. A figure emerged from the darkness. Mark. For a moment, Lyra's heart stopped. She had expected to find him in pain, broken, but instead, there he was, standing tall, his posture confident despite the scars that marred his body. His uniform was torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but there was no mistaking it. He was alive. "Mark," Lyra exclaimed, her voice filled with both relief and shock. She couldn't believe it. She had been sure that he had been left behind, lost, forever. But here he was, standing before her. Mark's eyes softened as he looked at her, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The world seemed to pause as they stood there, facing each other across the vast emptiness of the planet. Moment didn't last long. Distant sound of enemy ships landing grew louder, snapping them both back to reality. "We don't have much time," Mark said, his voice rough but determined. "They're closing in." Lyra nodded, the relief she had felt fading as quickly as it had come. The situation had changed. Now it was no longer just about finding Marquette. It was about surviving. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady. "There's a safe zone not far from here. We can regroup and plan our next move." Mark shook his head. "No time for that. We can't run forever. We'll have to fight." Lyra didn't hesitate. She could feel the power inside her, but she knew she couldn't do this alone. Mark was stronger than he had ever been, and with the artifact's energy coursing through her, they stood a chance. But even as they prepared for the battle ahead, the weight of what was at stake pressed down on them. The enemy was close. Had no idea how many ships were coming, but Lyra could feel their presence dark, menacing, relentless. "We'll need a plan," she said, taking a deep breath. "We can't just fight blindly." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "We'll have to use the terrain to our advantage. I'll take the high ground. You can use your new abilities to get to their ships. If we take them by surprise, we might stand a chance." Lyra looked at him, unsure of what to do. She had never fought like this before, and she wasn't sure how to use the artifact's power effectively. It was as if she had been given a weapon, but no training on how to wield it. Mark seemed to sense her hesitation. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. I'm right here with you. We can do this together." She nodded, her resolve hardening. She had to trust him. They were a team now, and she couldn't let him down. Together, they moved into position, the quiet of the night broken by the sounds of the approaching enemy. Lyra could feel the fear in the air, but she also felt something else, a spark of hope. They had each other, and that was enough. As the enemy forces landed, Lyra's senses were heightened. She could hear their footsteps, feel their movements, and she knew exactly where to strike. With a deep breath, she focused on the energy within her, feeling it respond to her will. The world around her seemed to slow as she moved, the power of the artifact giving her speed and strength that she had never known before. Mark was already in position, his weapon ready. He was a soldier at heart, and his training kicked in as soon as the enemy appeared. Lyra couldn't help but admire He had fought for her once, and now he was fighting by her side. The battle began. The night air was thick with tension as the enemy forces began to make their move. The land seemed to vibrate beneath Lyra's feet, and she could feel every footstep, every shift of movement from the approaching soldiers. It was a strange sensation, almost like the planet itself was holding its breath. Waiting for the inevitable clash, Lyra stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the wide valley where the enemy had landed. Mark was already taking position on higher ground, his silhouette visible against the dim light of the planet's twin moons. His figure was steady, confident, as though he had already prepared for what was about to happen. She could feel the power of the artifact within her, its energy pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was both a comfort and a challenge. She had never been in a battle like this before, and she knew that she couldn't afford to fail. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about saving Mark, saving herself, and protecting everything they had fought for. The first wave of enemy soldiers appeared from the shadows, their heavy boots thudding on the ground. They moved in perfect formation, as though they had rehearsed this moment countless times. Their weapons were drawn, and their eyes were fixed on their targets, Lyra and Mark. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't hesitate. Feel the energy within her surge as she moved, faster than she had ever moved before. She pushed herself to the limit, using her newfound abilities to dart from cover to cover. Staying one step ahead of the enemy, Mark, positioned higher on the ridge, fired his weapon at the advancing soldiers. Each shot was precise, methodical, hitting its mark with deadly accuracy. He had always been a skilled marksman, but with the enhancements from the artifact, he was even more dangerous now. Lyra could see the confidence in his movements. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, was a force of nature. The enemy was beginning to realize that they had underestimated the two of them. Lyra could see it in their eyes, the flicker of surprise as they tried to adjust to the speed and power they were facing. They had expected an easy victory, but now they were on the defensive. The ground beneath them seemed to explode as an enemy soldier fired a blast in their direction. The blast narrowly missing Lyra. She barely had time to react before she felt the rush of power in her limbs. She raised her hand, and in an instant, the air around her was filled with a strange energy, her mind linking with the planet itself. The artifact pulsed, and the ground responded, sending a shockwave through the air that knocked several of the enemy soldiers off their feet. She took a deep breath and quickly moved in to strike. Her body felt lighter than air as she jumped into action, her speed and precision more than enough to take down the first group of soldiers who tried to advance on her. They were quick to retaliate, but Lyra was faster, every move calculated. Every strike deliberate. Mark had already moved to another location, using the cover of the cliffs to get a better angle on the enemy. He was now working in perfect synchronization with Lyra, their movements almost like a dance. She could feel his presence through the link that the artifact had created between them, a quiet assurance that made her believe they could win this. The enemy forces were regrouping, but they were clearly struggling to keep up. Their numbers were overwhelming. But Mark and Lyra had something they didn't: the element of surprise and the bond they shared. More soldiers appeared from the shadows, and the battle intensified. The air was filled with the sounds of laser fire and explosions, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Lyra's senses were heightened, her mind focused on every movement, every shift in the air. She could see the path the enemy soldiers would take before they even knew it themselves. It was as if she could predict their every move, but even with the power of the artifact at her side, she knew that they couldn't hold out forever. She needed a plan, something to turn the tide in their favor. "Mark," she shouted, her voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "We need to get to their ships. Take out their command center." Mark's voice crackled through her communicator. "I'm on it. You keep them distracted. I'll make my way to the control room." Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just going to fight to survive. She was going to fight to win. They needed to end this quickly, before the enemy could regroup and mount a counterattack. With the plan in place, she moved into action once again. She could see the enemy's command center in the distance, its towering structure standing tall. Against the chaos of the battlefield, it was heavily guarded, but Lyra could feel the power surging within her. She could do this. The moment she moved toward the command center, a hail of laser fire came from the soldiers surrounding the building. She ducked, using her speed to weave through the oncoming fire. She moved like a blur, her body reacting before her mind could even process it. Her movements were sharp, precise, every step calculated for maximum efficiency. She reached the command center's entrance in a matter of moments, her heart pounding in her chest. The doors were heavily reinforced, but Lyra was undeterred. With a deep breath, she focused on the energy inside her, channeling it into her hands. The air around her crackled as the energy built up, and with a loud crack, the door exploded open, sending the enemy soldiers inside scattering. Mark had already breached the perimeter from the other side, his path cleared by the chaos Lyra had caused. Together, they were a force no one could stop. Mark moved quickly, taking down any soldier who got too close. Lyra, using the artifact's power, disarmed their enemies in a matter of seconds. They were inside. The command center was eerily quiet as they made their way through the darkened hallways, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, the pressure mounting as they closed in on their target. The enemy's leadership was here, and they needed to take them down to stop the fight once and for all. They found the control room at the heart of the building, and there standing in front of them were the enemy commanders. They had expected victory. Now they would be facing their downfall. Lyra and Mark exchanged a glance, the unspoken words clear between them. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the final push to end the war. With a single nod, they moved in. The control room was silent, save for the sound of their footsteps echoing on the cold metal floor. Lyra and Mark stood side by side, their eyes scanning the room. The enemy commanders were seated at a large table, their faces twisted in surprise and anger. They hadn't expected the humans and aliens to break through their defenses so quickly. And now they were trapped. Lyra could feel the power of the artifact thrumming through her body, its energy alive and potent. She had used it to heal herself, to gain the strength she needed, but now she was aware of just how much power was within her. The artifact had given her abilities she never thought possible, but with that power came responsibility. She knew that she had to use it wisely if they were going to win. Mark was already moving forward, his focus sharp and unwavering. He had always been a skilled soldier, but now, with the enhanced strength and precision given by the artifact, he was a force to be reckoned with. His weapon was raised, ready to strike at the first sign of danger. But Lyra could see the calm in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something bigger, for a future, where peace was possible. The enemy commanders were scrambling now, realizing that they were outmatched. Some of them tried to reach for their weapons, but Mark and Lyra were faster. Within moments, the room was filled with the sound of weapons being dropped and soldiers surrendering. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that the tide of the battle had turned. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she stood before the enemy. These were the people who had sought to destroy everything she had worked for, the people who had attacked her and Mark without warning. They had underestimated humanity. But now, they were paying the price for their arrogance. "Tell your soldiers to stand down," Lyra demanded, her voice steady and filled with authority. She had never spoken with such confidence before, but the artifact had changed her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Power was inside her, and she could feel it resonating in her every word. The lead commander, tall alien with sharp features and a cold demeanor, glared at her. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "This war is far from over. You cannot stop us." Mark stepped forward, his gaze cold and unwavering. "You're wrong," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "It's over. Your army is defeated. The galaxy is done with your games." For a moment, there was a tense silence as the commander considered Mark's words. Lyra could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew that their forces had been decimated. But pride, arrogance, and a thirst for power were hard to overcome. And he wasn't ready to admit defeat. "You're mistaken if you think we'll just give up," the commander said, his tone more desperate now. There are others. There are more powerful forces who will come for you. You cannot win. But Lyra wasn't listening to him anymore. She could feel the artifact's power pulsing through her veins, urging her forward. She knew they had to. End this now, before the commander's threats could become a reality. Then we'll be ready, she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. But this is over for you. This war ends here. Mark moved to secure the room, making sure there were no other hidden threats. He knew that they couldn't trust these commanders, even if they surrendered. There was no telling who might be, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Lyra stepped closer to the lead commander. "You're done," she said, her words final. "Tell your forces to leave. You've lost. The galaxy won't be your battlefield anymore."
Hey.
Commander hesitated, his eyes darting between Lyra and Mark. He knew it was over, but his pride refused to allow him to accept defeat. Slowly, he stood up from his seat and signaled to his soldiers to lower their weapons. It was clear that he had no choice but to obey. With the enemy commanders subdued and their forces retreating, the battle was over. Lyra felt the weight of the moment, a mixture of relief and exhaustion settling over her. They had won, but the victory was bittersweet. She had taken a life-altering journey. Now the galaxy would change because of it. Mark turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't need to say anything. The bond between them, formed through battle and sacrifice, was enough. They had survived together, they had fought side by side, and now they had won together. Lyra could feel the aftermath of the battle settling in. The energy of the artifact still hummed within her, but it was no longer as overwhelming. The chaos, the fear, the adrenaline, it was all slowly starting to fade. But she knew the journey wasn't over. There would be healing to do, both for the galaxy and for herself. But for now, she allowed herself to breathe, to let the weight of everything they had been through sink in. "We did it," she whispered, more to herself than to Mark. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we did." The room was quiet now, the tension finally broken. The threat was gone. The galaxy had been saved. Lyra looked around at the defeated enemy commanders and their soldiers. This was a turning point, a moment of peace, the beginning of a new era. But there was still much to be done. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. It would be rebuilding, negotiations, and healing. But Lyra knew that with Mark by her side, they could face anything. She took a deep breath, her mind already shifting to the next steps. They had survived the worst, and now it was time to rebuild. She had a new purpose now, one that wasn't just about survival, but about ensuring a future where peace was possible for all. A future where sacrifices like Mark's were never in vain. Together, they would face whatever came next.